You are listening to the 5 Squared Podcast, the podcast where we bring you tips for your business and your life. Our goal is to leave you smarter with ideas, wisdom, tools, and entertained. The 5 Squared Podcast is produced weekly for your enrichment. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow me on Twitter at 5 Squared and Facebook. All the links are in the show notes. Now let's get started with your host, business consultant, executive coach, and founder of 5 Squared, Tim Fives.
Welcome back to the 5 Squared Podcast with your host, Tim Fives. And Devon.
Sidekick.
Lackey.
Coffee maker extraordinaire.
Yeah, coffee.
Barista.
There we go. Is that a feminine word? Barista? Are there male baristas?
Yeah, I guess so. Technically, I don't know if that's still barista. Like
Baristas?
Yeah, we're not English majors.
Clearly not. So this is a special edition podcast for Steve Sanderson, who was what did he win? He won.
It was like Amazon Fire HD 8.
Yeah, tablet. That's right. And so part of the
giveaway.
Thank you. Yeah, we're fading a little bit. We're good. The giveaway was that Steve, as the winner, requested a specific podcast, and the podcast for Steve is, I think he wanted 10 things that you put into a business plan.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So Devon's with us because one of the things that he actually used, and I used in other companies creating business units, is starts with the business model canvas. And we'll put the link for this in the show notes. And then he created, why don't you just tell us what your illustrious professor walked you guys through in your entrepreneurial school?
So I just graduated from York College in May, as many of you know, and my senior level class, what I had to do was create a business plan, and it started with first figuring out what you're doing. In my case, it was a social media consulting firm.
What?
Hence why I do social media for Tim. And then basically we had to fill out the business model canvas, which Tim has laid out in front of me.
I do,
or
and
him, and
in front of us,
yeah,
perhaps
that works. Yeah. And that's basically, it lays out about 8 or 9 different key sections.
There's 9 sections.
9.
Would you like me to read them off?
It's been a while.
Yeah, he's a little rusty, folks. So we talk about key partners, key activities, key resources, the value proposition, customer relationships, customer segments, channels, cost structure, and the revenue streams.
And so that the business model is basically an abbreviated version of the business plan. There's a few other differences, but then when you get to the business plan, you basically take those ideas from the business model and you expand upon them, add more detail, and fluff it up.
And fluff it up
in a good way. Of course.
Yeah, okay.
Not just BS.
All right. So what I like about the business model canvas, and when I've used this in the past, at one of my previous companies, is to come up with a new thing. It allows you to get everything in one place and get your thoughts. And we actually use this at SCORE, the Susquehanna SCORE region that we're a part of. We use this because a lot of times when people are coming in the generation of their ideas, it's a great tool to get all your thoughts in one place and start to look at the overlap. So how did you guys use this when you created it?
The business model canvas.
Yeah, the business model canvas.
Yeah, so this thing's a huge oversized piece of paper. You can't see it. I'm sure you. But here, show them to him.
Yeah, let me show it.
Yeah, you should
right
see
there.
this thing right now.
It's a monster.
It's basically like 2 regular pieces of paper put together, pretty much, maybe a little bit bigger. But so basically, at first we used that as like we took sticky notes and we would kind of put it in each section as our ideas, and because you write on it,
yeah,
just your first thing that you put down is not going to be the final thing you put there. So you use sticky notes so you can take it away, put the next thing, and so that's kind of how it all started. And then we actually had to write, more than just a sticky note for each section.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been nice, but
Yeah, and the way we've done this, I've done this past is you just had great big war rooms with
Mhm.
whiteboards and stuff, and had each section laid out. So yeah.
And so we wrote like an abbreviated paper, which is probably maybe each page was like or each section was about a page or less.
Mhm.
Nothing, not too detailed, but
Just
enough.
all the
Yeah,
ideas that were in your head,
main
right?
ideas. It was like when it came to money wise and things like that, it was rough estimates. It wasn't like hard research numbers like the business
Hmm.
plan was. Um, and then so once we would hand that in, and then our professors would go through that with us, and you kind of like it's almost it's that preliminary step before the business plan. Like, okay, so not only in the business plan are you checking things, but in the business model, like, okay, is this even possible?
Viable. So
Yeah.
what was the biggest takeaway you had from going through this in this initial stage?
Well,
This is an initial
so
study.
I've done in school. I've done two business models. Well, I've done more than just two, but I did a business earlier in school
Hmm.
in college when we strictly just did the business model. So this time I started with the social media business. So I was started from scratch, and
Yeah.
like that was the thing. It's like I didn't really know everything there was to know, and can't say I still do know everything there is to know out there. But it was a good place to start because I when I first looked at the canvas, like I knew some of those areas, like I knew some of the like I knew my value proposition. I knew some of my revenue streams, some of my customers, but I didn't know all of that. So
Uh-huh.
it kind of made me, I had to go the extra mile a bit too.
Yeah. What I really like about this is like when you start to go through each section, it really gets you to think about, all right, well, what, because a lot of times companies in the startup mode, founders don't think about partners, right? And one of the things that I get everybody that I work with to think about is the fact that you don't need to do this alone. So that, you have internal partners and external partners and channel partners and things. And it could be you're going to outsource things like accounting and whatnot because that's not in your forte. So you start to get this master list of that partners, channel partners, technology partners, whatever they may be for your business um, in there. When you got, so that's the kind of the first one. You got the next one's key activities. What were some of the things that you pulled out right into the key activities that you knew you had to do?
So like some of the things. So basically, when I first did this, I knew like social media management was part of it. So like, um, but I couldn't just strictly do that. So that made me go outside the box to kind of think, well, what else could I do that goes along with this? So some
Hmm.
education classes, things like that. Some outside consulting work for companies as well. And then it just kind of like that one idea of the management, social media management, kind of branched out into all these
Hmm.
other possibilities and different things like I could do.
Cool. And then we get into resources. So what was the value of the resources? Like what did you come up with that you hadn't thought of?
So, uh, kind of key resource that I didn't really think of was financing. And a bank. I think I went with a bank loan in my business plan, um, and so I didn't really think of that as a key resource at first. I
Hmm.
mean, and then you go back through it, and you're like, oh
Hey.
yeah, it kind of is. And even for my business, it wasn't like I needed $200,000. It was like probably like a $20,000 bank loan, but it was
Hmm.
still I still need to lay out everything that I needed. And in addition to that, it was the physical things like office space and actual, furniture and, all down to that nitty gritty, which in the business model, I didn't really get into. I just knew furniture. And then in the
Hey.
business plan, it's like, oh, I need that desk. I need, the computer. I need
Hmm.
things like that that are essential.
Cool. So what did you, as we get into the next section of the value propositions, which I think is probably one of the key areas here. So how did you define your value proposition?
So one of my main things was I was for my business plan and for academic purposes, I was focused on a really specific target market, which I knew going like if it wasn't for academic purposes and it was my legit business plan, I wouldn't went as specific as I did, but I went specifically after like blue collar jobs like hardscapers, landscapers, and those type of seasonal jobs. Um, and that was mainly because of the purpose of research, because we had to have all the research, and
Mhm.
I wasn't really based off, well, just between everything else going on. It was hard to go through if I just said all blue collar and to
Mhm.
determine all the the target market for that
Yeah.
large population of businesses. So I went very specific, but so that was the one thing. There wasn't a lot of people that were very specific in what they do. They just kind of had a mass appeal. They would offer their services to really anyone who wanted to use them.
Yeah, and I like that. I like the being specific because when you get into the customer relationships and the segmentation, then your ability to tailor the messaging for each one of those becomes a lot easier, right? So you're not to your last point, you're not diluting your message to the general masses. So I think a level of specificity is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that was the main critique with the business plan was how specific it was. But it was a starting point because, it doesn't mean that I'm gonna only do landscapers, hardscaper. That blue collar focus was my, main focus. Because not saying that they're not technologically savvy, but statistically they're not compared to white collar businesses and things like that.
Yeah. So the next section, section 5, I guess if we're going 1, 5, yes, is customer relationships. What was your insights with
So
that?
being a consulting business, I knew that it was going to be very personal, as you know. You run a consulting business
Oh
or
yeah,
something,
or
don't you?
something
Of that
like that.
nature.
Some. Just
But
something.
so customer relationships were huge for me because, and that was actually part of my value proposition. I forgot to kind of mention was that I didn't want to just like do work for somebody and call it a day. Most of these, most of my clients in this business plan would have been relatively long term. If not long term, they were at least like in 3 month sections. So that's still I would consider that a pretty close and decently long relationship compared to maybe say like going to you go to a store and you buy something one time. Who knows when they're gonna come back to the store
Right.
again.
Right.
So I was really focusing on making sure that I was myself, very personable, very professional.
They don't know you very well,
Yeah,
do
and
they?
this section kind of came more down to me because
Yeah.
the whole business was around specifically me. For the initial couple years, it was hypothetically just me for 3 years, and then maybe if the business had grown to the point I projected, then I would add on for additional services.
So channels, that's number 6.
Channel. Okay, so well, one of the big ones that would make it sound right is using the digital channels. But for my target market, that was actually not a channel to go with because we were assuming that they were not technologically savvy. It would not make sense for us to target people through digital channels. I mean, I some email and some social,
Yeah.
of course, is needed, but that would not be like our main route for targeting and trying to find customers. It was going to be more that direct mail, more physical advertising, that the tangible stuff.
Yeah.
I guess you know.
Well, getting out and what we find, and this is even with the clientele that fits us that we have today, it's about time too, right? So we have quite a few clients that come to us and they realize the social media piece is important, but they don't have the time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's the level of consistency and engagement that does take quite a bit of effort. So especially in that small business area, you're running landscapers and you got 4 or 5 guys, 6 guys making good money, but getting the lead generation and those things set up for them, that's tends to get a little bit out of their wherewithal, more from a time perspective than I think anything else.
And if they're not, if they're not using social media for themselves, how are they going to find me unless they're on
Right,
Facebook
yeah.
for that couple of minutes? And but you can't always depend on that. So there has to be other routes that you take.
Mm-hmm. So we got into a little bit about the customer segments already. That's section 7 out of the business model canvas. How did you say? Because you had focus, so I think you had pretty good segmentation there. But what was your? Because this is, I think, where I deviated a little bit from the professors. Is that I think you had really targeted customer segments, and that you can stagger your segmentation. So get one rolling, get it up and running, and then go on to the next one. And they don't all have to be done in a serial capacity, but you can start to stagger those, because I think the messaging for the customer segments is important and it's varied. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, so like I kind of said, I kind of touched on that, but my process was, I wanted to start with one, because if you start too general, then how it could be completely different for, say, a realtor versus a landscaping business. And so I wanted to focus on one specific one, kind of learn from that, and then move on to, that's when it was, the hardscapers, or something similar to that nature, but wouldn't just strictly limit myself to that. So I wanted to stick with that mentality. And realistically, I mean, it kind of just depends on the person. Me, for the academic purposes of this, I decided to stick with that. And like I said, that was the only critique of my business plan that I really recall. I think that was the thing they really hammered. They're like, "Why would you just do it for that?"
Well, and it was interesting because that was I remember that was one of the conversations you and I had prior to going into that, and so I actually at the end of your presentation I explained in more detail to the audience there that was judging the things as to why. So I think they got it when we were done. But cost structure, next one.
So my costing structure for the business was, there was it was a little bit of mix between fixed and variable. It kind of depended on the service. So the management, that was one of those services that was both fixed and variable. So there was a certain amount per month that they would spend for the service, and then there's a variable amount, which was typically the ad spend and things of that nature. And then I also had a social media startup service in this business plan, where it was basically someone who did not use social media, or the same situation, except for we kind of start them off, and we grow that presence, and we do the posting for 3 months, and then if they want to continue the services, then they can continue paying for management. If not, they can kind of take it off on their own, and they have this this base that has been built. And then the training, that was kind of also, it kind of varied. It was fixed in my business plan for calculating people, but I think that would be more of a variable cost, because I can't predict how many people are going to come every single time.
Sure.
And the final one was consulting hours. Just I would guesstimate how many hours of consulting that I could do per month each year. And so those were my main revenue stream and cost structure.
Cool. So we covered both of those revenues. So you had consulting, training, the social media startup, and then the management services were your revenue streams.
And once again, I didn't want to do too much, but then I didn't want to limit myself to strictly one thing.
Yeah. Well, I think you're focused on a set of activities that translate into different revenue streams. So that's really good. So you put this business model canvas together. You had all this stuff, and then what was the next step in the process?
So once the model was all together, that was kind of when we had to present like our business model to the rest of the class. We kind of critiqued each other, kind of asked some more open-ended questions, and why did you do this? Why did you decide this and not this? And so that kind of took us back to the drawing boards. And then this is probably like halfway through the semester or so, and then that's when we started working on our business plan. And we would work on that section at a time. If you go right down the list here, well, executive summary, you do not do that first. That is the last thing you do, but it is the first thing on there.
Yeah.
For those, I guess, who do not know, the executive summary is a summary of your whole business plan. It's typically about a page or so, and it's probably if not, it's the most important section of your business plan. I mean, some people argue and say it's the financials are your most important, but your executive summary typically is, because most people aren't going to sit down and read your whole 30, 40, 50 page business plan. But if they could read the first page and get a summary of the whole thing, that could determine if they're going to keep going or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got the company overview, the product and service plan, marketing and industry analysis. And I'm curious about that. How did you do your industry analysis? 'Cause this is a question I get asked a lot. What are the tools that you use for that?
Okay, so the first thing I did was customer research. So since it was hardscapers, landscapers, I called upon some local businesses. I used my buddy. He has a small local landscaping business. I talked to him about, basically I gave them a survey that I made, asked them the questions on there, which varied from, about their social media use to if they would use a service like this, have they used a service like this, and so on. And then from, this is a 1-2 guy operation, and all the way up to, I've talked to uh, one of the largest landscaping companies in the area, talked to them, asked them the same exact questions. And it's interesting what you would find, you know, uh, that there is some variation, of course, between a 1-2 man versus, I don't even know how many employees they have, but
A gazillion.
the largest. But then there's also, some I guess leeway in between, because both of them are willing to use a service like this. Some had, like, the larger one told me they had used one before, but they had some, I guess, issues with their
Which is great information, right? Because then once you know what the issues are, you can tailor be like, well, hey, we can go in and fix
But
those
it was
issues.
good to know that, like, I asked them how much they were willing to pay. The smaller one, of course, said less than the bigger one, because the bigger one had already paid. But the smaller one still said, it was like, he said like $500 or something, which still, for a very small landscaping business, that's I mean, that's definitely a start. So that was my one. That was my primary research. Secondary research, we used a variety of different resources. Luckily, with your college, I was able to use a lot of their databases, like IBIS World, to give customer and industry um, reports, things like that. So that was how I got most of my research, between talking to people and doing the online research.
That's it. That's all you got. That's good.
Thanks.
And then the other one is the competitive advantage, and this is something that we're kicking up a new project in a week or two. That will be using some of these tactics to get out. But I'm curious as to what or how you guys address the competitive advantage.
So basically, for my operation, very small. It was just going to be me. That was one of my main competitive, or not. It was one of not my main, but one of my bigger competitive advantages. It was just me. The fact that it's not some big, large marketing agency that this manager has. They just get slapped on your desk type thing. I don't know the process exactly of how these go through, but it's not like I don't see these people going out and grabbing, meeting the client and everything like that. So the fact that it was just me going out there doing the work, that I was the only face that they would be interacting with. I'm the only point of contact, no secretary, no this, no that. Like, so that was actually one of my competitive advantages. At least for the initial couple years of the business, and even when it's still small, I still consider that a competitive advantage. Another one was just we kind of talked about with the relationships earlier, is that I don't want to just do work for them and kick them out the door. It's nurturing that, and having that that high level of service with them. And then the final one was also that specific target market focus we had discussed earlier.
Yeah, I think that's huge when you're focused in on that, and then you get the knowledge capital around those industries. and the specific needs that they have, I think you definitely have the ability to tailor solutions for them and iterate on the solutions and services you're offering. So,
and I also, I almost forgot that that millennial perspective. I always like to talk
Lord,
about.
here we go, millennials, blah blah blah.
Hey,
let's. Do you need a minute? Do you need a hug?
Yeah, I need coddled.
Yeah. Continue. What about the millennial?
Can I have a raise, please? So, not saying that all social media managers are middle-aged people.
Right.
Not the stereotype, but being younger and having growing up with social media technology, us millennials, it just comes to us a little bit.
Well, I think the other side of it is having a millennial that's grown up with the tech. I mean, if you look at the buying power and the demographics of the buying power over the next couple of years, that's going to shift from boomers and even Gen Xers to millennials. Like they're going to overtake the purchasing decisions and things within most industries. So, that I think is, in everything we've talked about, was probably an underrated strength that you were bringing to the table.
It's almost like being ahead of the curve.
Right. Yeah, but I'm ahead of the curve because I got Devon.
Boom.
What? Well, cool. And then, so one of the things that, I don't see in here, maybe you guys did it, maybe you didn't, but one thing that I find with when you're writing these business plans and the models and things is that a lot of times that's where it stops, right? So one of the things that I always stress to people is once you have the plan, this is a dynamic document. It's something that you're going to be iterating on over time and you should keep up to date. And the reason you keep it up to date is so that you can measure it. I can't tell you how many times people are like, oh, I did a business plan, then we never looked at it, it collected dust. So there's a couple other tools that we use or that I've implemented with my clients is once you get in like the financials and the various things, actually putting a roadmap together saying, all right, here's the key milestones that we need to achieve to get the business off the ground. And then you can measure your success against those milestones. So where you are and then can iterate and modify as you go. And I think that's one of the traps that I've seen people fall into is they're like, well, this is my plan. Well, it's usually more for guideposts than like I'm going to follow every single step of this along the way. So, and
if that isn't one of the more important or most important thing, I think the next important thing is getting financing. Having a business, I think it'd be a lot harder to get financing without a business plan than it is with.
Well, you can't. I mean, every bank is going to ask for some iteration, maybe not a 50-page document, but something that says, hey, yeah, I have thought this out, and I know what my decision points are along the way to make the best use of the loans and things that you're going to get. And we help a lot of people score with that, where it's, okay, here's, you can go to the SBA, you can get these things, but they're going to require some iteration on this. And SCORE and the SBA are great places to get additional templates, and I'll put those in the show notes.
That's what I was just about to say about, I'm recently talking to a new business owner who said he used SCORE in order to start his, they helped him write a business plan, and that business plan then, got him financing for his business. And, he's doing great.
Good. So, Steve Sanderson, I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. I think we've covered your question, and I hope this, I know is helpful for you and for me. It's always good to go over this stuff. So, everybody, I guess, has recovered from their turkey coma and prepping for the next turkey coma. So
it's a minter season.
Minter season, is that what they're calling it?
Mint in winter, it's all mint stuff in winter. Minter.
Got it. Yeah. So are we out of the pumpkin spice season yet?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So pumpkin spice, just so I'm clear, is just for fall, right?
I think once Thanksgiving hits,
it starts to die off.
Over.
Can I start drinking eggnog again? Yeah, we're in eggnog season. Good.
I think we already got some in our fridge. So
fantastic.
Hey, once again, head of that curve.
All right, everybody. Thanks a lot, and have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you so much for listening to the show with your host, Tim Fives. We hope you will pass along our web address, fivesquared.com, to your friends and colleagues. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at